So I recently put up a video taking people from 0 to a tuck planche. Now I'm a lot more confident training people to that level. I have more experience doing it, and I'm okay. I'm pretty strong in a tuck planche position. I can enter and exit out of there, and I can hold for 20 to 30 seconds quite comfortably. Now, where do we go beyond the tuck planche gets very interesting. There's lots of different training methods. I've personally got to around a straddle planche, and I've recently made it a bit of a priority to try and get beyond that and head towards a full planche. So I'm going to do the same as what I've done for the tuck planche and show you what exercises and drills I personally would use to take you beyond the tuck planche. So the footage I'm going to show you today is the actual training footage from my session yesterday. So I've warmed myself up to the tuck planche, I've done a protraction hold, and I've just done a tuck planche hold. So progressing from the tuck planche is actually quite challenging because the tuck planche in itself is pretty similar to the crow. It's easy to make your body one segment, like one ball, which is much easier to hold and balance. So all we want to think about now is use that tuck planche as our home position, and we're just going to slowly move the knees away from the chest. And this will start to flatten the back out. But what makes this challenging is the lever arm starts to get bigger. So we need to take the shoulders a little bit further forwards, and there's a lot more demand on that protraction and pushing forwards. So I've done a protraction hold and a couple of reps of the normal standard tuck planche. Now I'm going to use a slightly higher hip position. One, because it's much easier to demo things. And two, it's a good place to start, and I can play around with the knees because it's much easier in that high hip position. So that's the initial goal, is to slowly take the knees away from the chest, which is going to flatten that back out. Now I said before, we can make this slightly easier as I'm showing here with the higher hip position. So that's one way of making it easier. The other way you can make it slightly easier when you start to play with the position is to use a band. So some of you would have used the band to get your tuck planche. So you can put the band around your hips and around your ankles. I definitely recommend with this one to keep the band around your hips if you can, because we really don't want to be going backwards too far, because we want to keep the intensity like slowly getting harder from the tuck planche. So band around the hips and just start to slowly take the knees away from the chest. Now you can obviously do both of these. You could have a higher hip position with the band and vice versa. So here I'm just showing a couple of different options. First of all, the higher hip with the band and without the band. And then I'm going to try and go lower hip position. Now this is much harder to try and hold that position, especially for me because I'm so used to doing the handstand press work where the higher hip is easier for me, and it also brings the hip back towards the hand, which is an easier position. So now we can keep working on that tuck planche. Now obviously we could just do sets and reps here, aiming to get between 5 and like 12 seconds is a good place to be. So once people have got comfortable with that tuck planche position, they're normally going to start to look at things like the straddle planche. Now just opening straight into a straddle position from the tuck planche is another big step up. So what do we do in between? So we have a few options. Again, we could use band assist, we could do the high hip version, or we could do the frog position. So this is the frog position with and without the band. So it's like an open tuck position, but also open legs. And we're starting to point the lower leg out behind us. So we're starting to open towards a straddle position. Now, obviously there's variations of this where you could go closer and closer towards the straddle. We could raise the hips, we could lower the hips and change the hip angle. Next, let's look at the straddle planche position. So with the straddle planche position, there's a big difference on flexibility here. So if you have middle splits, your feet can come much closer towards your hands, which makes the straddle planche much easier. But ideally, if we're going towards the full planche position, we want the legs going behind us quite a bit. So it's going to be like a stepping stone towards the harder variations of the full planche. So here I'm showing the best one I could do yesterday of the banded version and then the full body weight version. So notice with the banded version that my feet are sticking out behind me more. So going more towards that full planche position, and the hip is more open. So my goal is I want to try and get my straddle planche to be more like the banded version that I'm showing here. So that's about the level that I'm at in terms of what I can hold without the band. There is a couple of other variations you can play with. There's the half lay position, which should be an open hip bent knee position. Now I tried to film one of these yesterday and it was really challenging. So if you look at the video, you can see that the hip is actually closed a little bit, where ideally it would be fully open. And I had a band around the hips. So this one isn't a great example of it. So ideally you should have a straight body, and only bend should be in the knees. So it's basically a full planche with a knee bend. Another variation is like a half tuck, half straight position. So one leg is straight, one leg is still in your tuck position. So I personally haven't done much single leg work, but it's something I'm going to start to explore. I'm now starting to put in at the end of my sessions some play in the full planche position using the band. And notice there's a couple of different ways that I went into it. So I played with this yesterday. The first one is trying to lift the toes up off the floor in near enough a full straight body, which is really hard. The other way was to go in with a closed hip and then open up. So you can see when I come from more like a open tuck position, then open the legs up, my feet are already high up, which made it much easier to get into the position. I'm still relying on that band obviously way too much, but it'll be interesting week to week now to assess to see how much I need the band. So hopefully that's given you some ideas on how you can take your practice beyond the tuck planche. Now it's something I'm personally working on 2 to 3 times per week. So as I explore and get more into this, I'm going to give you updates and let you know how I get on. I'll be really interested on your thoughts on the road to a full planche or any other planche questions you have. Stick them down in the comments below, that would be awesome. Thumbs up and subscribe will be appreciated, and I'll speak to you next time. Thanks guys.